Welcome to That 1 Inch Barrier. This is our very first episode, and I'm very excited to be here. My name is Nick LaBarrow. I am from the Instagram page, Nick's Flicks Fix, and I'm joined today, Josh Barry, Kieran Griffiths. Boys, how are you?
Good, yeah.
Good. Yes, I'm good.
This is an exciting little project for us, something that we've wanted to do for a little while now, and that is to talk about not just the best, but I guess some of our favourite in the world of international cinema outside of Hollywood, ultimately. And I know I've known you boys for a few years now, for a while. I know, Josh, you are a big fan of foreign film. This was sort of there was a catalyst here of you wanting to talk about this. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what foreign film means to you and why this project is exciting for you.
I think, I've always been into movies, but I think once I got into foreign films, it really propelled me into taking more of a deep dive into things. I think that was probably the main reason I set up my Instagram page for more lesser known films. I kind of wanted to have a bit of a look on Mubi, the streaming service, and I know that's when we started sort of chatting about that aspect of it. And this was our little way of actually having a reason to go on there and kind of watching a bit more.
What about you, Kieran? Your Film Notions on Instagram as well,
Yeah.
because obviously we're chasing the clout at the same time. So, and Kieran, Pretentious Film Club on Instagram. Talk us about sort of your history with film, and obviously you have a bit more of a, I wouldn't say eclectic taste, but compared to me, who is lining up for the next Transformers movie, so you guys have a bit better taste film than I do. Talks about foreign film in your life and sort of what cinema means to you and your excitement for this show as well.
Yeah, I don't quite have the, affinity for Michael Bay that you do, so maybe that makes me a little bit more artistically inclined. But despite, I guess, the whole name Pretentious Film Club, it's a bit tongue-in-cheek because, foreign films especially are a pretty huge blind spot for me. I've seen, I guess, a lot of, what you would call the essential foreign cinema. You look at things like Parasite and City of God and Blue is the Warmest Colour and kind of that essential film from every country.
Yeah.
But it is something that I've really wanted to explore more. So that's why I'm really excited by this. Is just an opportunity to deep dive on some lesser known films in some countries that maybe don't get the representation on the big screen and to wider audiences. For me, I think my start with foreign film came from watching Drive, which is obviously an American film, but then doing a sort of deep dive on Nicholas Winding Refn's filmography and obviously his start in Danish language cinema, which he's gone back to recently with his new Netflix series as well, which is super exciting.
Have any of you watched that?
I've watched the first two episodes.
Yes. Yeah, I've watched a couple.
Good.
If you like Nicholas Winding Refn stuff.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
I feel just with the episodic version of it, each time I stop and then start, it kind of takes me out of it a bit.
Yeah.
But it's good. It's definitely his.
Very stylish.
Yeah, very, very, very. Yeah.
So I guess that brings us to the show itself, That 1 Inch Barrier. And obviously the title of the show is reference to Bong Joon-ho's incredible Oscar speech when he won Best... So he gave that speech when he won Best Director, I believe. No, sorry. He won an Academy Award. It's a Parasite. I should have done my research. Good one, Nick. But he gave a speech in which he was talking about how you can open yourself up to a world of cinema if you just get over that 1 inch barrier, which is the subtitles, which I guess is a big turn off for modern audiences and probably just more general audiences as well. They'll watch the subtitles on a Hollywood American film, but all of a sudden it becomes a bit too much when it's an international film. But it's true. I feel like you're missing out on such a wide range of incredible films, incredible stories, and incredible filmmakers just by putting yourself off from that. So I guess the reason for the show and what we want to try and get across is that there are movies out there that are some of the greatest films ever made that people haven't seen. And there's some that are just really good movies that I feel like people should be checking out. That you should just get over the fact that there's subtitles and lose yourself in a world of beautiful cinema. So not to turn people off the show on the first episode, like, you suck for not watching foreign film, but you're missing out. You're genuinely missing out. And I guess for me, foreign film has always been there, but I was similar to Kieran. I was like, Parasite, I love, that was my favorite movie of the year it came out.
Yeah.
And it wasn't until we started doing when we went to the Brisbane International Film Festival together
Yes,
for the first
yes.
time. And I saw my first Takashi Miike film, First Love,
Yeah.
which is crazy to think like that guy's done Audition and like
Yeah.
all these insane films that I've now seen retrospectively that I missed out on all years growing up. So I think I have such an appreciation for foreign or international film now, at least, that I can be like, all right, I'm not necessarily well versed in it, but this is a good excuse, or these podcasts is a good excuse to go back and revisit all those. But let's kick off. Let's get into our first film. And Josh, this was your pick. So do you want to talk to us about Reprise?
Yes. Last year. Oh, sorry. No, we're in 23 now. So the year before, my favourite film was The Worst Person in the World.
Yeah, it's a good movie.
Amazing.
Incredible.
When I was having a look over Mubi, I noticed that his original films were on there, and more in particular, the trilogy, the Oslo trilogy that he's now completed.
Yeah.
And Reprise being the first one, and being his debut film as well.
Wow, okay, I didn't even know that.
Yeah,
So
it's
this
his,
is his first movie.
it's his
Yeah, right.
debut feature.
Okay,
So,
cool.
the director we are talking about is Joachim Trier from Norway. No relation to Lars.
So that was my assumption when I saw Worst Person in the
Yeah.
World. I was like, oh my god, this is like must be the son of Lars von Trier, but obviously that's just
That happened to me after I watched Thelma, which is another
one of his. Yeah,
because it gets a bit weird, and I thought, oh, this must be some sort of relation. But
it's got
no.
some von Trier.
Runs in the family.
It does. So this was in 2006. Debut feature film from him. So I because I know the three of us really loved Worst Person in the World, I thought it'd be a good place to start.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's a good
revisiting.
excuse to,
Yeah.
like I said, do the full Oslo
Yeah.
trilogy as well.
Yeah.
Reprise, the basic rundown of the film, or the tagline on IMDb: fueled by literary aspirations and youthful exuberance, two competitive friends endure the pangs of love, depression, and burgeoning careers. I guess, as to break it down, like simply, this to me, and I don't know if it's just that voiceover and narration that he uses, but I was like, oh, this is his worst person in the world, but for the mid-20s. Whereas Worst Person in the World is someone transitioning into their 30s, and I'm unsure what the second film in the trilogy goes about, but I kind of like that this is you're a fly on the wall watching these people, these two friends ultimately, you know, go through their early to mid-20s together, but in a sense of like he manages to capture the thought process of someone so incredibly well. So you're pretty much just inside the mind watching these two friends and their life. So this was my first time watching it.
It's only my second, and I think the first time I watched it would have been, honestly, around 2008, 2010.
Right.
So I'd completely forgotten.
And yeah, I hadn't seen it before either. Obviously, big fan of Worst Person in the World. Really enjoyed that. But yeah, this was my first experience with the movie as well.
Yeah.
Fantastic. So initial thoughts on the film. Obviously, this was your rewatch. So going into it, and I guess seeing it over a decade later, was there anything that specifically stuck out to you as that has evolved over time?
I think the only thing that obviously has changed for me is The Worst Person in the World, and then coming back to this and seeing a lot of the similarities, and pretty much seeing, like you were saying before, a similar story but just different decades in someone's life, but also seeing him make, 15 years ago, his first film to Worst Person in the World, is sort of latest. Just, I guess, the similarities in him filming, but now seeing Worst Person, seeing how he's evolved and really honed a lot of that. Yeah,
itself,
exactly, yeah.
What was your initial thoughts, Kieran, taken away from the film?
I think, again, like comparing it to The Worst Person in the World, you can really see how, the director who directed this would go on to do that with, more time, more experience, and more money.
Yeah.
It very much feels like, and while this is a bit of an oxymoron, like a professional student film.
Like
Like that very sort of run and gun style of shooting, like a lot of shaky cam, a lot of very fly on the wall. It just felt very authentic and very real, and I think that's sort of a recurring theme with European cinema in general, especially stuff that kind of lends itself towards like French New Wave, which obviously Trier is a big sort of been influenced by. But yeah, it's those coming of age movies really hit home with me.
Yeah.
So
Totally.
it's
Yeah,
really
yeah,
connected
yeah.
with it, especially as someone who I guess grew up with those kind of same literary ambitions, but never quite got to where they wanted to be with it. So it really kind of hit home in that regard.
I guess in that regard, this movie is definitely hit a nail on the head, because how it ultimately starts is that we have our two main characters, Philip and Eric, and they both put in the letterbox their manuscripts for a novel they want to write. They're young writers. They want to be novelists that are going to change the world. They're influenced by a writer who means a lot to them. So they whether they know it or not, they're sort of copying the style of this writer they love, Dahl, I believe his name was, and
who's based on a real author I read.
Oh, is it? Okay, interesting.
Yeah,
Right, So not different name, but
different name, but very similar background. Very a recluse. Only ever did one interview in his life.
Wow.
So there was.
Right.
Yeah.
Trier pulling from
Yeah.
what he knows.
Yeah,
And I think what you were saying before, Kieran, about how Trier has developed his artistic styles through life experience as well, and there's no better way to see that comparing this to Worst Person in the World. Yeah. It's kind of interesting that he manages to put his experience on screen at such a young age, but in a way that's incredibly accessible at the same time. Like, I felt like I do writing, I do film criticism, but at the same time I was like, the competitive edge that's between Philip and Eric through the film, because there's so much love between these two characters, but it's kind of like, I guess to backtrack a little bit, the film opens with them putting the manuscript in the letterbox, and they envision what life would be like if they got the manuscripts made. Like, they're like, they both live these fantastic lives. They move to the different European countries they want to move to, but then reality sinks in and only one of them gets their manuscript made. Yeah. And it's interesting how the dynamic between the two characters changes because of that. But it reminded me a lot of myself of, like, we're all in the same space of Instagram movie reviews. And there has to be a competitive edge to that. We all want our posts to do well, and we all want our reviews to be read by most people. But if we didn't have each other in that space, it would be a lonely thing. And it's interesting how this film shows how competitiveness can drive people apart to an extent and make you realize how much you lost by doing that. And then, seeing it from the view of like, well, we're all good friends and we want each other to succeed. We can sit back and go, that's a blueprint of what I don't want to happen ultimately. Sure. And I think Trier gets it incredibly right. He and back to what something you were saying as well, Kieran, that there's a youthful energy in this film, and I think it's easy to be like, it's like the punk rock version of Worst Person in the World. I know you're saying that like they literally go to punk concerts in the movie, but his editing style, especially through the scenes where he is showing what life could be like, the freeze frame photos, the loud music, the narration, really gives it this energy that isn't. The style is copied in Worst Person in the World, but in a very more timid, I've grown up sort of way. So I think I really like, and that's one of the aspects I loved of Worst Person in the World. So I loved seeing it here, but I loved having that sort of shot of, adrenaline pumped into it as well. I
think as well, touching on the male relationships in there, I think that's something that he does really well. Like, male friendships, I guess, are a very sort of complex thing in that films don't always portray them in the most realistic or honest way. And I think that sort of, displaying it as a support network of like-minded individuals, people that you have a lot in common with, but also very different people. And we see that in, some of the characters are, I guess, a little bit more cultured than others. And I guess it shows how you can, be, as you said, competitive with people, and they can drive you, they can push you apart, but you're sort of willing to forgive more because they are your friends. And I think it really nailed that dynamic of a very eclectic group of individuals, but the friendship that they can have despite that.
One of the interesting things that I think this movie does well with the eclectic friends group is making you be able to care about everyone too. There's scenes where I think especially Eric, halfway through the film, Eric does get his manuscript. So Philip initially gets his manuscript published, and then that's kind of drives him apart. Then Eric does eventually get his, and the person that it sort of turns him into is quite an interesting dissection of, what do you do with the success once you have it? You've been chasing that for so long. You've seen your friend have that, and the person it turns him into. And I think Trier does a good job of making you not hate Eric in those moments, but understand that, like, this is the dog chasing his tail, and he's got the tail, and now he's like,
what do I do with it?
What do I do? This isn't exactly what I thought, so now I've got to kind of I got to be the person. And I think when he is with, I think it's Joanna, it was the scene where they're at the beach with all his friends and he's like being real like...
The publisher.
The PR. Like, he's been like real misogynistic and shit because his mates are being real. And it's interesting to be like, Trier can really get you into that headspace of like, he's doing this he's acting out for a reason. And I think there's a lot of passion and care. And obviously it makes you feel like that, you know, that's something he probably went through as well in his early days of writing in there. And he does romance well. I mean, the relationship between Philip and Carrie in this film is one of those heartbreaking ones.
Yeah, I mean, I think it is similar, again, going back to The Worst Person in the World, like there's that underlying love story and what love can do to different people. And I found that really interesting between the two lead characters. They're different. They're both with someone. One basically never sees his girlfriend and they've never met his friends. And the other one kind of drives him a bit crazy. So I just found that dynamic really interesting.
He does it well.
Yeah.
He does it really well. Let's jump into some questions, I guess, about the film, starting with what was your favourite scene in the film? Is there one that sticks out to you that is the pinnacle of what Reprise was all about?
I think for me, one of the scenes that kind of really hit home was the house party scene.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think that's when it all sort of, you know, everyone kind of cuts loose a bit and you sort of see these characters, I guess, uninhibited. And you get a real sense of who they are when everyone's watching but no one's watching as well. And I think it really captures, like we were talking about, that youthful energy that's coming across not only in the narrative but in the style of the filmmaking. And it's just kind of a culmination of all those things. So that for me was probably the scene where I kind of went from being a bit on the fence about the film to probably tipping me over as going, okay, I really like what I'm seeing here.
I love that flick where they obviously take over the music. And and then as soon as that hits, the whole atmosphere just changes and everyone's into it. And I just like, it kind of, you know, puts what you were saying fully into effect.
You can't beat a good needle drop in a film. If it's done right at the right moment, it can completely change a scene.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. It's fun. That scene's quite fun too because it's another one of those aspects of where Trier's like, because of the mild success these guys have had, they're like, well, this is for us. Look at what we've done. And it's interesting. And it's an interesting dissection of masculinity. And I refrain from calling it toxic masculinity because it's hard to not deny, like, these guys, even though they're literary dudes, you wouldn't assume, like, if you said testosterone-fueled guys, you'd be like, oh, they're going around and drinking and doing drugs and punching people and shit. Like, that's not what they're doing, but they're using masculinity and a testosterone-fueled, you know, way of living to sort of, like, they're putting that into their writing and the way that they act as writers and as friends. And that's the scene to me where I was like, it's an interesting dissection of what toxic masculinity can look like in a more restrained sense. And I love the party scene too, for me. Because I was the same. I was sort of on board in the sense of like, I'm really liking this movie. I don't think it's as good as Worst Person in the World because I did love that movie. But then the house party, I was like, shit. I'm like, there was a tension there that I was like, well, I don't like where this is going to go. And then obviously it leads to places where you're like, oh, these are now the ramifications of completely devoting yourself to an art form that doesn't necessarily pay off, I guess you could say, in that regard.
I think more than toxic masculinity, it's almost the ego that comes as a byproduct of masculinity.
That's a great way of putting it.
Because I think inherently as men, you tend to have this, I guess, more narcissistic, you know, ego-driven personality. And I think that's amplified by, you, as you were saying, the success they've experienced. And you look at, you know, the scene as well where the publisher, Eric's publisher, hooks up with one of his friends who was probably the most misogynistic member of the group who she hated. And it's just like how, you know, those opposites attract kind of thing, which, I mean, again, is something that you see a lot in your 20s, like the two, you know, the guy and the girl that don't get along whatsoever usually end up together purely because they can't stop thinking about one another.
That was a good scene in that party scene when that happens. Because you can kind of just sense it's gonna.
I do love it. This is jumping forward a little bit. I love when Eric has his like, oh, this is what my future could look like. and it's that friend who then publishes a book and has a really successful PR campaign. I thought it was just a good little jab on the nose from Trier there.
It is a surprisingly funny film.
Yeah,
I think
it really is. No, it is.
Yeah.
I think the way that we're talking about it and like the synopsis of it, you wouldn't expect it to be a funny film. But The Worst Person in the World is very much the same. It was probably one of the saddest films I've ever watched.
Yeah.
It's one of the few times I've cried in the cinema. I'm not ashamed to admit that because it's a very sad film.
Yeah.
But it is deceptively funny, and Reprise is the same.
Yeah.
I think the scene, again, going back to the party, when one of his friends goes into the bathroom, meets a girl who's crying, and she just completely turns her personality around and decides to hook up with him in the bathroom. Like it's funny.
Yeah.
And
I
he just
love
really
when
disarms you.
He comes out and he's and he's just owning the place.
Strutting around.
That's right.
Well, I think that's a common thread through Trier's films, and obviously we'll touch on this when we do more of his films throughout the show, but he has this ability, and I think the humor comes from just life. We know these things. He's never going for a joke. It's not a setup and a punchline. We laugh because I'm like, I've seen that. Yeah. Like I know exactly what these people are like and who they are. Yeah. And he nails it every time. The same way he gets the anxiety of thought process and how people come to conclusions about things from one event, he does the same with humor. Yeah. And I agree. I think Reprise is funnier than it leads on to be.
Yeah.
Who, like, talking about the characters a fair bit, who is one of your favorite characters and performances in the film? I'll go, Philip. It's hard to not be attracted to the main character. Yeah. Philip is played by Anders Danielsen Lee. Is it Lee or
It's Lee?
Lee. Yeah. I think he is obviously in a lot of Trier's films, but seeing him, it's hard to not talk about him comparatively to Worst Person in the World, where he's a very different character.
Yeah.
I think he, in this film, for me, was my audience input. Like, he was the one I understood the most and sort of went on the ride with. But this could be just a European cinema thing in general. No one, I find, ever overacts. No, you can watch some films where, you feel like you're watching an opera or a stage play or something like that. I feel like in this one, there's so much accessibility. Perhaps it's not because there's a movie star quality attached to them compared to like a lot of the films we do watch.
I think that might be.
I think it helps a lot, absolutely. But he's just so nuanced.
Yeah, he is.
There's so much quietness in his performance, but then it can be like one look or one way he delivers a line of dialogue. I'm like, there's a lot going on inside this dude's head. And while we do get like the physical manifestation of that through the narration and those flash forward scenes, there's something that like maybe we needed that to get more inside his head because his performance is so inner.
Yeah.
There's a lot going on inside that guy's head of, anxieties and not thinking he's good enough and, pursuing perfection, not just in literary, but with that romance with Kari as well. So for me, I think it was Philip, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, he's great in it. I did a little bit of research into him. He's a part-time actor.
Yeah, right.
He's a full-time doctor.
Did you know? Have you known about this?
No, it's news to me.
Yeah,
that's insane.
And I was talking to Christian at work, who's resident
Norwegian.
And he said he's actually he said doctor. He's not a GP or anything. He runs when doctors have issues and he's kind of like the head man. So he's like a full-time.
I love how in every facet of life, the Scandinavians just show us how to do everything. It's like, oh yeah, you have actors, we have actors too, but they're also doctors.
Yeah.
He, when they were filming Worst Person in the World, was just coming off being like a frontline doctor during the COVID outbreak. He was like in the hospitals when COVID was first rampant in Norway.
Yeah.
And then if that didn't destroy him like it would have any person who was like a health officer during that time, he then goes and gives an outstanding performance in The Worst Person in the World. It's unreal. Yeah. It's unreal. So,
obviously, he, even though there's the two leads, he has it for me.
Yeah.
There's a couple of scenes, like going back to the favourite scene. One of my favourite scenes was the car scene when they pick him up from the.
Oh my God! Yeah.
And there's the four or five friends in there, and
That's
just
really
a few little jokes, and
but
then it's tense, and so that, and then towards the end where he goes into his girlfriend's work and has that breakdown. That was an amazing performance.
Yeah. I think we've all probably been there, unfortunately, with friends who've gone through something traumatic and you sort of don't really know what to do or what to say. You want to support them, but you don't want to upset them. Yeah. So that felt, again, it comes back to that relatability of I've been in this experience. I've felt this. It doesn't matter that it's in a different language, in a different country. I can connect with this.
I guess for context, and this isn't necessarily a spoiler, not that we're not spoiling the movie, but he obviously gets his manuscript made, and then we're not necessarily shown, we're sort of, there are elements like we see him in a hospital, his bottle over him. Then there was a suicide attempt. And so obviously it's another one of those aspects Trier puts in the film of, what is the price to pay for perfection? What is the price to pay for success? And then obviously when it was too much emotionally for him to handle and he turned to the suicide attempt to sort of get away from it, there is a sad darkness in the film when he then tries to go, okay, if I'm not going to get perfection in writing, where can I get it from? And that's when he invests so much in the relationship with Kari. And then when it leads to that scene when he goes out into her work, and is like, well, there's even a scene before that when he's trying to recreate the first date in Paris.
Oh yeah, that's
it's so like it's never played on, like there's no musical cue for you to be like, this is sad. Like what you're just left to be like, take what you want from this scene. Like you can think it's cute if you like, but then Kari's reactions are like, I'm not comfortable here.
That was awkward.
It's a really awkward scene, and it's really sad. And then it obviously climaxes at when he goes into her work, and you kind of sit there and you go like, if you were Kari in this situation, you'd be like, you'd want to get out of there as soon as possible. But because we've been on Philip's side for the whole movie, you want him to fall in love so bad, and you want that to work out for him. But then you kind of like, this man needs help. Like that's the thing at the end of the day. And it's Trier's ability to be like, you love this guy, and he's a funny guy, and he has it, but like, just don't forget that this is the troubled person he also is. So,
and I think as well, again, I don't want to talk too much about the worst person in the world because we're talking about Reprise, but that is something that he has in all of his characters in that film as well, is that they are not infallible people. They're not terrible people. They're not good people. They're just people, which is how people are in the real world. And backtracking as well to what you're saying about, I guess, the sort of very authentic performance, how it feels like you're watching real people, not actors. This is something that I've kind of joked about, but semi-seriously in European cinema and in stuff in the UK as well, is that not to, sort of bag anyone out, but like British actors and European actors generally aren't as good looking as the people you see in American productions. There are people in, who have lead roles in European films and like British films and British television shows who would not get cast in America because they aren't good looking enough. But I think that makes them look and feel more authentic because they look like real people you'd see on the street, not a movie star.
Exactly. It's funny how it's two different industries where Hollywood sex sells, and then literally everywhere else in the world it's like quality sells.
Authenticity.
Authenticity sells. It's quite crazy, and that actually kind of leads into the next question quite well. And we've spoken about it a fair bit. How does this film compare to other Norwegian films we've seen, and then other films from this director? And I think we obviously touched on it a little bit, but and I'm sure you guys will probably echo the same sentiment. This is the start of his introspective look at people in arts, I guess you could say, for lack of a better word, because when we get to Worst Person in the World, she's a writer as well. Again, I'm not too sure with Oslo. Well, was it Oslo August 31? I haven't seen it. So
in all honesty, it's been a long time, and I've forgotten. I from memory, it's a lot darker. But I read that Joachim is not interested in, or I shouldn't say not interested, but his main point isn't plot. It is literally just character study, and sort of.
I guess this movie's a perfect example.
Well,
of that,
it is.
isn't it?
Yeah.
So I guess comparatively to his other work, it seems like the foundation of what is to come from his evolution. Kieran said it perfectly earlier. Through experience, through getting better at his craft as a filmmaker as well, it seems like a beautifully accessible story for that time of his life, and then it just gets better and better with how he explores those themes, because they are very similar and overlapping themes. So I think, having seen Worst Person in the World before this, I had more of an appreciation for Reprise.
For sure. I think it's probably a perfect time for people to go and watch this now.
Yeah, totally.
Because I actually, I think now that you've seen that and loved it, you can kind of get a lot of appreciation from this.
It was there all along. He's just better at it now.
You can see those motifs and the mise en scène that come through in the film, like the narration.
Yes.
It's probably a little more utilised in this film compared to Worst Person in the World. He does lean more heavily on it. But even those sort of like smash cuts, the freeze frames, those things that he obviously embeds in his style.
Yeah.
You can see the beginnings of it.
Yeah. I mean, I've not seen. I think I've seen most of his non-English films, but I haven't seen Louder Than Bombs.
And that's an English language film.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
Which I know didn't do well critically when it came out. But his other film, obviously there's this trilogy, and then Thelma I saw and didn't even know it was the same director.
Yeah.
And it's completely different for me. Like, it's pretty out there but amazing as well. So
I know you've spoken about that film quite a bit.
I loved that film.
I guess I'll just have to pop up on the show one
day. Yeah,
perhaps.
maybe.
What a shame.
Maybe.
But I think also, like, I'm a massive fan of Nordic Scandinavian films. I think generally for me, that region, it's normally a lot more quirky. This is, as we've been saying, a lot more real.
Yes.
But I love that quirkiness of Nordic films, like
I think you
bringing that dark and humour.
I think that's it though. The authenticity comes from that. It's like kind of as like corny as it is to say, life is quirky.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like there's like no one ever goes through life in a full, serious, scheduled, monotonous way. Like their life just has its quirks.
Yeah.
And people choose to either go with it and laugh with it or be challenged by it. And I think Trier does a good job of showing both sides of that.
Yeah.
We get the quirkiness as the audience because we know we're not in that situation.
Yeah.
But the characters who are dealing with it sometimes don't deal with it in the best way possible. And I think that's, I mean, based on the two Trier films I've seen, it seems like a common thread throughout his films.
Yeah.
Anyway, so, but if you had to characterize Trier's style, if you had to put it in a word or talk about how Norwegian cinema comes across to us as not just an English speaking, but especially an Australian audience, is there a way you can, or a word that you can characterize his filmmaking style?
I think authenticity. We keep coming back to that, but I think that is a big thing that I took away from it.
Totally.
And I think if you were to take that same script or that same basic narrative and you were to give that to an American writer and director, you would get a very different film that doesn't hit home nearly as much because it would feel much more Hollywoodized, much more dramatic than it needs to be. And it's a dramatic story in and of itself. But I think authenticity is the one thing that I come back to. And I've noticed that I've not watched a lot of other Norwegian film, but obviously there's a lot of overlap into other Scandinavian countries, other Northern European countries like Denmark. I don't know if that technically qualifies as Scandinavia. My geography is not great.
I asked the wrong guy.
I'm pretty sure.
But a lot of the films, they do tell very human, real stories in a very real and human way that feels relatable. So I think that's, from a narrative point, relatable and authentic. From a visual filmmaking perspective, it's, as you kind of said, it's very punk rock. It's very, shaky camera, fly on the wall, almost run and gun. All the scenes aren't perfectly lit. I wouldn't be surprised if he kind of did a couple of takes and was like, okay, let's move on, because it seems very, matter of fact. This is how it's made. Just throwing everything at the wall, whether it's narration, whether it's those jump cuts. Like, it'll just cut to black and then to a completely different scene, sometimes for dramatic effect, sometimes for comedic effect. So it's, kind of a real smorgasbord of visual quirks.
Yeah. I mean, I think, I guess we keep saying Oslo trilogy, but what does that mean? And he's, they're all based in the city of Oslo. Yeah. And I think, coming back to this one, it really does showcase the city. Any of those street scenes and just that natural sunlight coming through. Yeah. This time rewatching this, I definitely got more of a sense of being there as well. I felt like after watching the few films, almost feel like you've been there, sort of thing.
Yeah,
so
totally.
I think it's a good way of seeing those countries, seeing those cities. Yep.
I think introspective would be something I would say as well, because so much of what Trier puts through in that narration, and like I've said, is just the human thought process. Some of that narration is just rambling.
At points it's a bit scatty for me, and it was actually a bit and obviously that's mainly the first sort of third or so,
and he refines it.
He does
refine it a fair bit.
But I was getting lost a bit and liking it, but also going, can I keep up with the subtitles? I guess.
Yeah, true.
It was a bit of an issue.
It's one of those things where, and I think that's why I like that, to be honest, because that's just how my and I'm sure that's a lot of people. That's just how my brain works. I can be like going this way and then my tangent will lead here, but then I'm like, oh, I've got a story about that too.
Yeah.
Oh, don't worry, we'll get back to
Yeah,
here. But
yeah.
And to me, it's just
Like a good Billy Connolly story.
yeah, exactly, yeah. And in fairness, like a good Billy Connolly story and a joke, he always manages to bring it back around and you're like, oh shit, that's what we were talking about. Yeah. So I think the introspective nature of what he's able to put on page of like the human thought process, whether it is confidence, anxieties, all those, like all the range of emotions that you have when you're thinking, I'm a big fan of. I kind of sit there and go, holy shit, like there is these are my thoughts on the page. And I think he does that as well, like we said, a lot more refined in Worst Person of the World. Yeah. He manages to sort of get a bit of a lasso around it and be like, okay, this is me at this time in my life. I got my thoughts together a bit more.
I mean, as I was watching that, I did think, okay, I think this would play off better in your nation. Like if you were from Norway,
yes,
it would be a little bit easier to follow.
Yeah,
because it was like, and obviously it's the opening and pretty much the opening of the film. So you're like, okay, now I've got to start reading.
True, yeah, actually, good point. Yeah, there's a lot to take in initially. Yeah.
It's probably not the best film if you've never watched a foreign film before. Probably not a great place to start.
Totally.
Or like read a bit of a book before you start or something, just to get
it's very hard to follow, especially at the start. And I find that with any foreign film is that you really notice the subtitles for the first 5 or 10 minutes.
That's right.
But absolutely. You very quickly then get used to it. It's the same with when you're watching a black and white film. And I've watched a couple of silent films recently because that's a big gap in my knowledge.
Yes. Yep.
And again, you very quickly you notice it, but
then it just goes away.
Yeah, and it's just you're watching the film.
That's right.
So I think that's a big thing. It's probably not, if this is your first foreign film, maybe watch Worst Person first and then come back to this.
I think so. Yeah.
I think as well, my other point that I wanted to bring up with Reprise is that this, again, just based on the two of Trier's films that I've seen, this is his most linear. Now, while Worst Person in the World does follow in a time sense linear, like we don't go back and forth too much. This for me was like, this is an event that leads to an event that leads to, like the cause and reaction is quite prominent here. Yeah. So it's interesting to see that what we end up getting with Trier's work is a lot more vignette-y, which I don't know, it's not a word, vignette -y, vignette-y.
My favourite character from The Godfather.
This is it's me trying to be more international on the podcast. In the sense of like, it's interesting watching him write and construct a story that this is happening because of what's happened previously, a lot more linear, a lot more straightforward. Even though when you break down the plot of Reprise, you could make a 20-minute film out of this just based on the plot. But like you said, he wants to make stories about characters.
Yeah.
So that's where the story is fueled mostly. You're watching people.
There's a lot of character development.
Absolutely. And some people don't do it well.
Yeah.
But Trier does it very, very well. Yeah.
There's a lot of scenes that I think you watch and think, oh, well, that didn't really go anywhere. It didn't really lead to anything. But then you look at how it changes your view of the characters and then it serves its function that way.
Absolutely.
Going back to what you were saying about obviously the city of Oslo being a character in and of itself, something I found really interesting with Trier's films is that, obviously as people living in Australia and presumably having never been to Norway, Oslo is like this really exciting, really foreign place. But for, the 20-somethings who live there and who've grown up there, it's like, I want to go to Paris, I want to go to London, I want to go, anywhere else. So it's really interesting to kind of get that feeling of like, it doesn't matter where you're from or how cool your city might be. Yeah. If you grew up there and you're in your 20s, it's still the place you grew up in, the worst place ever. So that was really something interesting because it's not something we see a lot. Like you look at the way that I guess, other cities like Paris or like New York are portrayed in cinema, New York especially.
Yes.
Everyone loves it and hates it at the same time. But it's just interesting that, young people, no matter where you are, you hate your country, you hate your city.
It's funny because when both Eric and Philip both do their what could have been flash forwards, the first thing they do is I moved to this other city.
True.
It's so funny for you to bring that up because it's and I'm the same. Like I was born and bred in Brisbane, and I'm like, God, I'd love to live in Melbourne or I'd love to live in like London or something. But I'm like, pretty good life here. But it takes time to then be like and it's just another one of his Trier's authentic traits is that he doesn't shy away from the fact that not negative thoughts, but, for this argument, I guess, negative thoughts are always going to be there. It's just how you work with them and how you react. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. do we have any final thoughts or anything we wanted to bring up that we missed before we wrap up and give our final reviews of Reprise?
The only thing I wanted to touch on is, I know you guys spoke about Anders Danielsen Lee and his performance, and absolutely loved it. Obviously, he's become a frequent collaborator with Trier and the other Oslo trilogy films in which he features.
Yes.
And has had, I guess, more of a successful career than some of the other actors in the film. But the actor who played Eric, I'm going to completely butcher the pronunciation,
that's all
but Espen Klaumann Huine, I believe it is.
Yep.
I thought he was really good, and I
was
looked
great.
at his filmography, and he's really not done much
He's not done
outside of
anything.
this,
I
which was
noticed
so
that
surprising.
because I instantly thought I recognised him.
Yeah.
He has a very recognisable face for
Yeah,
me.
yeah.
But then I was dismayed he hadn't really done anything.
Yeah, because I thought he was phenomenal.
Yeah, he was really good.
He was the character I probably related to more out of the two, so I think that's why I kind of had that emotional connection.
Yeah.
Because I don't think necessarily either of them are the main character. I think it's very much a story about the two of them.
Yeah, totally.
But I really, really enjoyed his performance. He felt very sort of dynamic and very conflicted, and I felt like he had a very clear arc. And we sort of saw him progress from the start of the film to the end of the film, and it was really interesting in that, he sort of got what he wanted but wasn't necessarily happy, which you see in a lot of films, but it felt, again, a lot more genuine here. So that was kind of my only thing is, I really, really liked his performance, and I was quite surprised that he hadn't done much else.
Yeah, he's incredible. Yeah.
Yeah, but I saw an interesting thing because obviously you said that Trier and Lee have worked quite a bit together. Trier compares the evolution of the two of them to Linklater and Ethan Hawke.
Right, that does make sense.
The full trilogy. So I just found that a little interesting.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? Yeah. Because that's the thing, and like we've already said with Worst Person in the World, that is made by a filmmaker who has grown up, for lack of a better word. Like, he's not in his early 20s anymore when he's written the script of Reprise.
Yeah.
He's gone through life experience, and especially I know this sounds a little bit, not pretentious to say, but the life of an artist. You know what I mean? Like, yes, totally, there's worse things you can do in the world, and there's tougher things to go. But the emotionality of an artist is one of those things in cinema and fiction that is portrayed as a torturous thing mentally. The tortured artist, the person who is so stuck in their own thoughts and they have to get them out in the world. Like, that, in some ways, is Trier as a filmmaker. He obviously uses film as the outlet for his grievances, his torture, his and then seeing that come to fruition in Worst Person in the World as something that is, okay, now try being an artist when people want you to have kids, when people want you to get married, when you have found love and lost love and failed at love. Like, that sucks just as much as it is in your 20s, but you have so much more going for you in your 20s. That's where I feel like Reprise has that punk rock energy of I don't want kids, I don't need to get married, I'm going to be a writer, I'm going to be the best goddamn writer there is, even if it pushes everyone away. And then at the end of the film, he's just like, I wish I didn't push everyone away. You know what I mean? So it's interesting how he evolves as a filmmaker in that regard. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
This was as well, obviously, Trier's first film and his first collaboration with the writer Eskil Vogt.
Yes.
Who has written, I believe, or co-written all of Trier's films with him. Yeah. So it's really interesting, that kind of dynamic between writer and director.
And also recently, The Innocents.
Yes, he did do. Have you watched The Innocents?
I've not, no.
Oh, we might have to do that on the show, because that's a good movie.
That is a good
Add it to the list. We're going to have to keep a running tally. But I think,
you're right.
It's something that's really interesting, because I think with directors, it's either that kind of auteur style, someone like Tarantino is my always go-to, he writes and directs all of his own films, so he has kind of full creative control. Yeah. Or you get someone like, a David Fincher, who doesn't write at all, doesn't really work with the same writers too often, will adapt stuff, will have original screenplays, but he still has a clear style as a director. So it's really interesting to have a director who directs, a writer who writes, but they both keep coming back to one another. So that's a really interesting dynamic. They obviously work very well together.
I like that.
Yeah.
I mean, and his work on The Innocents as a writer is incredible. So I think it's safe to say we all really enjoyed this film. Like, if I guess to give it a score on Letterboxd at Netflix. Sorry.
Shameless plug.
Very shameless plug. No dignity here. I gave it a 3.5. And then I think the reason I gave it a 3.5 is it's tough not to compare it after seeing Worst Person in the World. But like you said, it's almost like a very well-financed student film. there's definitely aspects of his filmmaking that would need touching up. That sort of gritty, grainy filmmaking, like, obviously shot in a digital video camera in the early 2000s. So it still has, it feels like it's part of its time and its era, but from a structural point of view, and while that does add to the energy, from a structural point of view, there are things he could have finessed about the story, made it, even though it is linear, there is still aspects of it that jump all over the place. This is just a running thing with me, and maybe I just don't have a good attention span. I feel like about 10, 15 minutes could have been shaved from the film. This, to me, feels like a strong 90-minute, real punchy film. There are elements of it where there are characters who get expanded on who I enjoyed watching their development, and it was specifically side characters that I was like, I don't need to know much more about you because I am more invested in Philip and Eric as they are. So I think a little bit of tightening up in the script and the film itself could have been handled, but it is such a strong foundation for what's to come. And to see where he's at now without filling the gaps in between, I'm more excited to see his evolution. And I have a funny feeling that each film will just get better and better for me. So I'm about a 3.5 at the moment.
I'm exactly the same, 3.5. The reason I picked it was not because it was a 5-star film, but because let's go back and see this guy's first film.
Yeah, totally.
And, we have talked about possibly in the future doing a bit more of that as well, seeing some big directors sort of first films. But 3.5 for me. I think for a debut, I think it's a really solid film.
Absolutely.
We're all incredibly diverse here.
Hey, 3 white guys, who would have thought? Who would have thought?
It's what the world needs more of, 3 white guys doing a podcast. I gave it 3.5 stars as well. As you said, it's difficult not to compare to his other film. But I really enjoyed it. I think it took me a little while to get on board with things. I think probably for the first half, I was a bit like, I don't really know if I like where this is going. But once, sort of that party scene, which I think happens about at the midway point of the film, that was kind of the point where I was like, okay, I like being with these characters. And by the end of the film, I wanted to kind of see, what happened with them after that. I wanted to stay with them a little bit longer. Not necessarily from the runtime perspective, but just sort of, it would have been nice to keep going. So 3.5 for me, I think. Not a great place to start if you're starting with Trier or foreign films or Norwegian films.
Yes.
But if you've seen The Worst Person in the World, you like that, then it's definitely worth a watch because there is so many similarities in terms of the story, in terms of the filmmaking style. And as we've talked about, it's really interesting to see where directors started from. Not necessarily from a short film perspective, but looking at their first feature, what can they do with a serious cast, a serious budget, a serious runtime for the first time. And I think he grabs it with both hands and has a very clear idea of the sort of movie that he wants to make. And I love that in a director when they're confident.
Absolutely. Reprise. A very good way to start the series, the podcast, the project, I guess you could say. So if you at home want to watch Reprise, it's currently available on Mubi in Australia. Also, just sign up to Mubi because it's awesome. There is a lot of good stuff.
There is a lot of good stuff.
And if you're wanting to keep up with this show, you probably need movies, to be honest. So that's Reprise. Before we wrap up the show, do we want to tease maybe what we're talking about next episode on that 1-inch barrier?
So after Josh's pick, I'll be picking next month's film, something that I've wanted to watch for a very, very long time, and that is Y Tu Mama Tambien. Yes. It's the 2002 Mexican film, Alfonso Cuarón.
Yes.
So it's been on my list for a long time. I think it's it's going to be nice to go, I guess, from European to Latin American, South American filmmaking, and then compare. And it's going to be fun jumping around the world. So really excited for that one. And another filmmaker who's gone on to do a lot of really big, cool things. Big Hollywood English language productions. And I think this is either his first or one of his first films. So
it's one of it. I just had a look before. It was one of his first. I thought it might have been his first, but
So excited for that.
Cuarón, absolutely.
Gael Garcia Bernal,
and
Diego Luna, who's massive now.
I know.
So
it was a starting point.
And they're little in it. They're young.
What a film to be a starting point of too. Because it'll be a rewatch for me. I know it'll be a rewatch for you as well. So
but I haven't seen it in a good few years.
I think it's been a while.
Glad you've picked that.
Probably over 10 years since I've seen it as well. So we're excited to do that. And as Kieran said, these episodes will be coming out monthly. The first Monday of every month, you will expect a new episode of The 1-Inch Barrier. You can find it on Spotify, Apple, Amazon, pretty much anywhere. Google podcasts. Whoever has podcasts, you can find this.
Put them all there.
We'll be on YouTube, the video on YouTube. Follow all of our Instagrams to see the clips. Yeah, that's it.
We'll see how we look on
see how-
camera
yeah,
first. Yeah.
If you guys are worried about how you look, imagine being me, who puts his face out there way too much. I'm shocked no one's tried to chatbot AI deep fake me somewhere to do some. Anyway, that's
It'll be
another.
too hard to keep up to, Nick.
Yeah, he talks too much. He talks too fast.
Too many videos.
At least you'd only have to do from the neck up because the shirt's always the same.
That's
so
true. Yeah. Actually, people are going to look at this show and be like, "Who's that
What
guy?
is
I've
that?"
never seen him
Yeah,
before.
yeah.
He only owns Hawaiian shirt." But you'll be able to see clips of the show as well. You can follow me at Nick's Flicksfix on Instagram, Twitter, and Letterboxd. Where can the good people find you guys?
Just Instagram for me. Film Notions. Instagram.
And for me, you can find me on Instagram at Pretentious Film Club and Letterboxd on Pretentious FC because there was too few characters.
I didn't know how to character limit.
Yeah,
There you go.
couldn't do
I am
Pretentious
on
Film Club.
Letterboxd. I forgot about that. Same thing.
Same thing.
Film Notions.
All the links will be in the show notes below. But Kieran, Josh, thank you.
Awesome. Thanks.
Thank
This
you
was
very much.
exciting. This is fun.
Yeah, it's good.
And hopefully it opens up the door to many of our listeners, many of our followers out there who really want to get into foreign to international film.
Get past that barrier.
That
one inch barrier.
Who would have thought? Thank you all for listening. Subscribe, all the technical mumbo jumbo stuff that makes us want to keep doing this, I guess. That gives us the clout that we're so ever chasing.
It's all about the cloud.
It's all about the clout, baby. Until next month, thank you so much for listening, and we'll catch you on the next episode of That 1 Inch Barrier.
Thank you.
Bye.